There we are. Okay, so hi everyone, and on behalf of Dr. Keith Heggett from the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, and myself, Dr. Sheena Elwick from Charles Sturt University in Albury-Wodonga, Australia, we'd like to welcome each and every one of you to our very first seminar that provides the launch to our Decentring the Human in Qualitative Research Methodologies seminar series that's kindly being hosted by the Australian Association for Research in Education, or AARE, as many of you may know it. So Keith and I are both conveners for the Qualitative Research Methodologies Special Interest Group that's part of the AARE. And this seminar has been something we've actually been developing for about a year now. So it's wonderful to see so many of you here tonight and from all around the world as well. So thank you for joining us. As many of you may already know, having read on our webpage for the seminar series, Keith, maybe if you could add the link to the webpage in the chat, that would be great. There's 6 seminars planned around this incredibly interesting topic, and each seminar is going to be followed by a debriefing workshop the following week. And our aim across the 6 seminars and workshops was to really create an international learning community that's inclusive of a range of scholars, including early career researchers and doctoral students. So Keith and I would like to start by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of the lands we are hosting this seminar from today. Even though we're meeting on a digital platform, we wish to take this opportunity to recognise the importance of the lands we all call home. We acknowledge that many cultures live on these lands today, and we should collectively respect the land and its past and present story for our future generations to enjoy. And we would also like to extend a huge thank you and to introduce you to Associate Professor Luke Bennett from Sheffield Hallam University in the United Kingdom, who very kindly agreed to present our first seminar, Reflections on Thinking Like a Brick, Posthumanism and Building Materials. Just keeping an eye on the time, you'll find Luke's biography and an abstract about this seminar on the webpage that Keith will provide the link for, or might have already done so, in the chat. So before I hand over to Luke, I would just like to remind everyone that the seminar is being recorded, and that recording will be made available to AARE members via the webpage. The registration button will actually be updated to a recording button. If you're not a AARE member but would like to access the recording, then please just email Keith or myself, and we can work that out. Now, there's going to be time for questions and discussions at the end of the presentation. We thought that that might be the best way. Okay, so I don't want to take up any more of Luke's time, so I will hand over to him now. So welcome, Luke.
Thank you very much, Sheena and Keith, and lovely to be here. Can I just check, because I've lost my little screen that shows me people's faces. Could somebody say that they can see my slides on screen?
Yes.
Yes, lovely. Thank you very much. Right, well, here we go. And I'm going to keep the tone light and playful, because this particular topic can actually get quite bleak at times. You may not be expecting me to say that, because in educationalist spheres, posthumanism tends to be seen very much in a positive lens, and I'm going to be speaking about a book chapter that I contributed towards an essay collection in this area, where I think I was trying to explore that bleaker side for the benefit of the educationalist audience. So let me dive straight in. This is what my presentation is going to range across. And you can see it starts, as all good things do, with confessions, just to set the tone, and we'll get to the confession shortly. So I won't work through those headings there. We'll take them in turn. You'll see, as a sort of visual motif working its way through this presentation, this recurrent image from Salvador Dali, entitled Sewing Machine with Umbrella 1, which is a surrealist painting inspired by the writings of, I guess you'd call him a proto-surrealist, the self-styled Comte de Lautremont's absurdist simile, as beautiful as the chance encounter of a sewing machine and an umbrella on an operating table. So just conjure that image, that focus upon things bereft of a sort of human form of sense and organization. That's the kind of realm that this presentation is going to be tiptoeing through in order to think about thingliness and posthumanness from my perspective and the perspective of the chapter that I've been invited to reflect upon in this talk. I'm not setting out to completely represent that chapter. I draw out some themes that I think are its core contribution, so to speak, but I'm equally interested in almost deconstructing the experience of having created that chapter. And so here come the confessions. I'm not proposing or presenting this talk in any way, shape, or form as a masterclass. I am not a master. This isn't even my sort of core area of academic endeavor. And I think it's quite helpful and important to contextualize what I'm going to say in that way. I'm going to explain the journey that led up to me writing that paper. And I think all too often in academic writing, we perhaps come to a paper that looks, or has to look, definitive and finalized in order to pass muster through review processes, etc. And all of the doubts, wrong turns taken, changes of mind, etc., have by the stage of publication been erased, not just edited out, but erased from the account of that journey of thought and action. So I'd like to make sure that during this presentation, I give you some sense of the process, the journey, the changes of direction, the doubts that crept in and had to be addressed. It's not going to be a woeful sort of wallowing in self-pity and self-doubt. I will be consistent and definitive in terms of the points that I make and that I extract from my final version of my chapter. But I guess if you feel that I haven't peeled back the lid enough in my own presentation, then I'm happy to be challenged even further to try and delve even deeper into and to destabilize my chapter via the discussion. So there's an open invitation there. The next few slides, I suppose, are a little bit ironic in that most versions of posthumanism are about decentering the I, as in the capital I, the ego, the individual-centered journey of thought being projected onto the world. And yet the next few slides are about the I, they're about me, they're about my journey of thought and my projections onto the world, but there we are. It helps to explain, though, how I got to the starting point of being invited to write the chapter, and origin stories are always important, I think. So my entry into thinking about the stuff of the world came from the perspective of thinking about the stuff of the world as items that are interacted with, that are framed by, that are used by, that are pragmatically adopted by certain interpretive communities. So in a variety of case studies, I did my PhD by publication. So in a variety of published case studies, I looked at particular instances where groups of humans were, in a sort of culturally structured way, orientating themselves towards certain banal seeming physical, often mute and immobile portions of the built environment, and imbuing those elements, those objects, with great significance and encoding them with great pleasure or concern. Without going into too much detail about the various images that you see there to represent some of the case studies that I did, I looked, for example, at a wave of concern that broke out about 20 years ago in the UK over tombstone instability, the risk of tombstones falling over and injuring people, and looked at the various professional communities and also the bereaved as they orientated to the heavy weight and the risk of falling of tombstones, and tried to work out what they should or shouldn't do about that in order to balance the various drivers and goals projected onto those heavy objects. In another study, I looked at the orientation of climbers and also quarry site owners towards the activity and risks of climbing within former quarry premises. I looked at anxieties over the management of street trees, the risk, of course, being that those street trees might come down and hit cars, as per that photograph, and the balancing there of conservation versus safety type issues. And then in the bottom corner there, those are photographs of abandoned Albanian pillboxes, a type of defensive structure, of which there are 500,000 in Albania, being appropriated by sunbathers, very sort of visceral, embodied adaptive use of structures which were created for a totally different purpose. And the majority of the work that I've probably done over the last 10 years has been around these sort of post-military engagements with abandoned military structures of that type. But that's as much as I'm going to say about that for today. But I start with this sort of orientation to say, whilst all of those studies, and therefore the nature of my work, is sensitive to the materiality of objects and our relationship with material objects, the human is still very present within the framing of the topics of inquiry. My investigation is of humans' orientation towards certain chosen objects, which they, in their particular interpretive communities, have chosen to foreground as of significance. What I haven't set out to do, and I'm not sure it is actually possible to do it beyond the realms of poetry, is to study things in and of themselves. I suppose it is possible outside the social sciences. That's what natural sciences do all the time, maybe, but within the social sciences, it's quite difficult anyway. So versions of me, what brings me to this line of inquiry, a number of strange intersecting lines of inquiry, number of strange different identities, perhaps you might say. So for the first 17 years of my life, I was a corporate environmental lawyer, a form of thinking about interaction with the stuff of the world, but not perhaps what one might expect. Then moved across into academia to become a built environment lecturer, very much doing pragmatic teaching around the issue of law that land managers, surveyors, environmental managers, etc. Need to know. So again, a very sort of pragmatic orientation in terms of knowledge being applied into the world in terms of getting stuff done, so to speak. But as for everybody, I guess, we all have needs, and my biographical background was that I originally set out in life to be a sociologist and never quite shook that off. And so when I came back into academia and did my master's and thereafter my PhD studies, the sociologist in me just was irrepressible and kept bursting through, the interest in theory. And the work that I've described, increasingly I targeted it towards geography journals, so human and cultural geography was the most comfortable outlet for the work that I was doing. And the stuff that didn't quite pass muster as academic outputs, I started to filter in a more playful direction into a blog, which I've been doing as therapy, really, I guess, for over 10 years now, putting down my more playful, surrealistic works into that repository, because it helps to get them out of my head and not have them haunting my leisure time moments. So the brick chapter emerges from a sort of confluence of those trends. And sorry, there we go. and also I think reflects a certain aesthetic sensibility on my part, which I think can be encapsulated visually by this artwork by the artists, plural, known as the Boyle family, which is a family of art makers from the 1980s onwards, whose particular thing was to take resin casts of, I think it's 1 meter square portions of the world, the more prosaic, the better, and then to reconstruct those sectors, as it were, of the world as artworks to be displayed upon gallery walls. And I just love this idea of bringing the banal into an art gallery and forcing people to stare intently at something that might otherwise go unremarked in order to find its strange, if not beauty, then beguilingness. As you stare, you think that's actually quite attractive or repulsive, depending on your taste, perhaps. I think it's quite attractive, but anyway. So the playfulness is a really important driving force that lies at the root of this chapter that we're talking about today. And in addition to the blog as an outlet for my more playful, surrealistic ruminations, I've also, for over a decade, been running an interdisciplinary group within my university called the Space and Place Group, where we convene various playful and interdisciplinary conversations around certain sort of themes. And we have people ranging all the way across from our sort of art school to our natural sciences, our humanities, our professionally focused departments, etc., to look at various broadly how is the world constructed type and how can we investigate it in playful ways type topics. So anyway, this is all by way of setup. And it was as a result of engaging with those various, I suppose, side projects, but needing to orientate them for university reasons towards something that could broadly be said to be built environment endeavor in order to keep my managers happy, that my frantic reading around all sorts of posthumanism, new materialism, and all the other ologies that you can see listed there on the screen came together about 10 years ago via the blog and other interactions, and led to one of the other members of the Space and Place group, Carol Taylor, inviting me to contribute a chapter on my take on posthumanism for her edited collection that she was organizing. Now, I think what I'll do, rather than go through these itemized bullet points, is I will actually leave this slide unaddressed. And then if anybody wants me to go back to this slide and talk to any of the particular elements in any degree of detail, or just to explain what particular elements are if they seem unfamiliar, we can do that in the Q&A. I think otherwise we could be here for quite a while and it might become a little bit dry. But if you like to think of it as a cookery recipe, these are the ingredients laid out on the table that then got to work and were put to work and interacted with me in the formation of the chapter and are expressed to one degree or another within that chapter. So the invitation to create the chapter came from Carol, an educationalist, well versed in innovative qualitative education research with a particular focus upon thingly relations within gender and higher education type scenarios. I wasn't paying full attention, though. Here's the first confession. I wasn't paying full attention when Carol invited me to contribute the chapter. I didn't hear the in education bit. And so when I finally got to sit down to think, okay, right, so I need to write this chapter now about posthumanism, my take on posthumanism, I suddenly spotted, hang on, this edited collection is about posthumanism in education. And that's where I had to start to do quite a bit of journeying in my mind and in the assembling of my materials to think, what is my take on it? Yes, I teach in higher education, but I've never thought about posthumanism in relation to educationalist endeavor and research, and the more I thought about it, the more I found it problematic to be trying to apply the outer extremities of the posthumanism that I've been reading about within an educationalist context. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time unpacking some of that in this presentation. So my general message, I suppose, and actually the conclusion I reach in this presentation, is we benefit. Notice I say we benefit, and we are humans, if we pay more attention to stuff of the world. And I need to sort of then unpick where that takes us. Stuff, it's all around us, clearly, and we are made of stuff. So it's not a binary that we are separate from the stuff that's all around us. Coming into this, I suppose, originally from a sort of social constructionist perspective, I'm fully conscious that the significance of stuff that I might encounter in any particular part of the world may be, the level of significance may be very different to anybody else standing next to me. And this image here is a photograph of an old, or old as in former, workplace that I worked at when I was a lawyer. And so it's very resonant in its degeneration and disassembly, because it completely unsettles my memories and feelings about having worked specifically within this place. However, to most viewers, it is just an image of slightly disordered generic stuff. So the starting point is, I suppose, from a human internal projecting out perspective, we all bring and create meanings to stuff around us for our own purposes. And there is nothing profound. Well, there's nothing novel in that as a conclusion. There's nothing post-human in that as a conclusion. Can we go further than that? And here's where we start to hit some of the deeper philosophy, I suppose. That orientation reflects what we might call stuff for us, or the things for us orientations, as exemplified by Martin Heidegger's tool analysis. The idea being that we appropriate portions of the world, objects in the world, for our own purposes, and we don't really pay any attention to them unless and until they break. So the moment at which the hammerhead slips off the head of the nail and bangs onto our fingers, or the nail snaps, is the moment at which we see ourselves embedded in a world of tools and objects that are being appropriated by us as tools. Still, that's very human focused rather than post-human. Graham Harman, a philosopher who did his PhD looking again at Heidegger's tool analysis, said, okay, so Heidegger tells us what it is to be a human being in terms of tool use and interaction with objects around us. What if we start thinking about tool being? What is the being of the hammer and the nail? And what is the separate relationship between the hammer and the nail if you take out the human? Which takes us into quite an esoteric territory, deceptively quickly. But it does take us to this notion of the thing for itself, or stuff for itself, and therefore starts to question, well, how on earth would we start to think about relations between hammers and nails if we were to subtract, or at least mute, the human element? So how do we go beyond us noticing stuff to having some sense of thing-to-thing relationality? In other words, how do we contemplate the world without us, which actually is a direction of mental travel or desire that some post-humanism does embody. And I guess my contribution to the edited collection is to show this more bleak side to post-humanism, and some of the thinkers who anchor that. So, for example, when we when we talk about decentering the human. There's a version of that called anti-correlationism, as espoused by Quentin Miller-So, who is keen to emphasize that the world doesn't exist for us. And things don't take their meaning because of their importance to us or the meanings that we project onto them. The world is fairly self-contained and happy without us. Another philosopher, Ray Brazier, takes this further into nihilism from a sort of moral philosophy point of view, and concludes, and this is where it gets to its bleakest, we live in a godless world that doesn't care about us, and in which, therefore, life has no meaning. Well, that's somewhere you then have to try and find a way of climbing out of, because you can't really do very much with that other than say, okay, well, if we're going to live and we have the opportunity to do what humans do, which is to make meaning and to act around us, let's try and find an ethics of acting and meaning making that is appropriate. But there is within what we might call deep ecology, sort of the extremes of ecological sentiment, almost an anti-human disgust, which I think is encapsulated really in Nietzsche's quote there, seeing man as some form of a disease of the earth, and summoning up some kind of idea of a cleansing of earth to remove fallen humankind in order to let the world get on with doing what it wants to do without us. So I like this quote from Pedersen, and I'll just read it out to emphasize the point. Taken to its extreme, posthumanism of this particular type, which I'm reporting here today, thus implies a dystopic, literal posthumanism reaching beyond the specific notion of the death of the subject to a scenario where actual extinction is at stake. So, contemplating the world without us. Just going to pause here for a moment, going to switch off words. There will be no speaking from me. I'm taking the human out of the equation. Other than perhaps attaining or aspiring to some kind of Zen-like calm, I'm not sure how what we've just collectively done can pass as research, and that view of inaccessibility of whatever it was we were doing a moment ago, or perceiving a moment ago, is really summed up in this quote from Timothy Morton, who talks about the inattainability, even if you apply a sort of deep time approach of staring through a succession of humans and thereafter robots at a rock or a brick. My paper was about bricks. You're never going to get a communication with the essence of what it's like to be a brick. So the writers in the vein of Graham Harman and also Timothy Morton, who can collectively be summated into the object-orientated ontologist wing of posthumanism, would say that all objects, and they would regard humans and the biological portions that make up a human in this regard, all objects are alien to each other. All objects parody each other in the form of their interactions, because no object has a full understanding of any other object out there, no matter how hard object one may try to understand object two. That may be a little bit complicated, but I think perhaps it will come forward as we proceed in this presentation. So there are difficulties in accessing the essence, if we believe in essences, of the non-human, and that difficulty is shared by all objects in relation to all other objects that are out there. It is not a specifically human predicament or limitation. So applying this to education, where I started to get quite stuck until I blacked away from the deep, bleak, alienated posthumanism that I was familiar with, which, to be honest, is quite masculinist, I think, actually, and stepped towards what passes as humanism, what is presented as humanism in an educationalist sphere, which is much more feminist in its orientation, less bleak, less nihilistic, and does actually, I think, intrinsically link to a retained faith in some kind of progressive humanism, even though it talks in terms of post-humanism. So post-humanism is sort of humanism improved rather than going beyond the human era of existence. Maybe that's the distinction between the two strands of post-humanism that I'm contrasting here. There are other forms of post-humanism which we need to sort of at least note in passing. There's an ultra-humanism, which goes under the name of transhumanism, which is all about celebrating our cyborg future selves, whereby our merger with machines will make for even better, more omnipotent human creatures out there dominating the world. And that's about as much as I want to say about transhumanism, because that certainly doesn't bring forward the humbling aspect of being more in tune with the world. It is much more a colonial sort of dominating type project, carrying on in the vein of classical Enlightenment humanism. Eco-humanism calls for better relations with the non-human through knowledge and understanding. Still quite human orientated. It's our knowledge that's being sought. It's our understanding that is being sought. But how could it be any other? And so what needs unpacking here is, okay, but isn't classic science methodology knowledge seeking, and in itself seeking totalization of situations and involving in ecological colonialism and appropriation and extractivism? Knowing the world and understanding it is only a short step then to appropriating from it. And understanding, what do we mean by understanding? What are the ethics of care? What do we mean by sustainability? Sustainability for who? Can we only ever be orientated towards the idea of ultimately sustainability for the human species? There's quite a lot left in there towards unpacking. So having gone on that journey, I came to sort of a tentative conclusion that we can't productively achieve very much by going out looking for the world without us, from an educationalist and social sciences point of view, at least. But we can be more holistic and appreciative of the more than human components of the world. We can park that bleak post-apocalyptic aspect of post-humanism as not really taking us very far. And we can instead say what our project needs to be is to understand materiality, our relationship with the stuff of the world, and how that is created and maintained through processes like traditional and non-traditional forms of education and cultural transmission. So not so much expressed in the chapter, but through reflection, I've got 4 strategies through which I would suggest we as educationalists and researchers can seek to be more attentive collaborationalists with the stuff of the world. And I'm just going to shortly play a short clip of this. It's something that I do. It's the closest I get to meditating, is that when I'm feeling really stressed, I'll put on these videos of people trying to lathe all sorts of weird tree roots. Don't ask me how it happened. I don't know. I just stumbled upon it on YouTube. I'll play a few moments of this. Now, it's quite mesmerizing, or I find it quite mesmerizing, but there's a problem, and it's only a problem that occurred to me after I put the original clip into this. We're not actually engaging with objects in and of themselves in that video, that tree root isn't being allowed to remain a tree root. It's being appropriated into somebody's hobby practice. It is being worked. The skill of the craft person who is doing the lathing is really the intended focal point of the video. So we're back to this idea of, as illustrated earlier, with trying to stare at the piled up pebbles. I struggle to find ways to connect with the thing itself. There's usually some slippage back towards human pragmatism and purpose that happens. But hey, I'm okay with that. I've gone on that journey and I've thought, okay, we just need an attentiveness towards investigating and understanding how materialistic relationships between us and stuff of the world are formed, what their effects are, and how they are transmitted within particular interpretive, i.e. learning communities, communities of practice, etc. So anyway, the 4 things I came up with, and this I suppose we could apply to the lathe person. Be attentive to situated thing knowledges. So that's after sort of Donna Haraway notion of situated knowledges. Think about how people do engage, probably often without words, to stuff as they work that stuff, learn how to understand that stuff and its behaviors. And in my chapter, I give some illustrations of stonemasons, parkour practitioners, how they read surfaces in the built environment, cement sprayers in tunneling. All of that gives us this non-textual, non-verbal, intimate relationship between human and material things. And I think that's probably an area where we need to study more to understand how, in particular situations, that sense of stuff, that attempt to render an object beyond us less alien, is worthy of study, although it does involve forms of appropriation, but I can't get beyond that in my line of thinking. So I follow Tim Ingold in seeing materiality as a verb. It's a relation. It's a way of living with stuff in the world and doing stuff with stuff. I'm also orientated towards aspects of actor network theory in terms of how do we form the assemblages between human and non-human that leads to particular projects and formations playing themselves out in the world. I also like the idea of using sensory poetics. Poetry can be an analytical tool to tease apart some of the stuff that is almost beyond language, and art, visual art also. So juxtaposition can work really well to introduce the multiple parallel realities and existences that are happening in a single situation. So here Henry Reed is talking about a group of soldiers being trained how to clean and use their rifles. And so the first part of this extract is all about the mechanisms of bolt action. And then Henry Reed inverts that in the final sentence to parallel what the humans are doing with what the nearby bee is doing in its relationship with the flower that it is harvesting for pollen, by doubling the expression, easing the spring. So in any situation, we may have our purposes in play, but there are other purposes around us which may or may not bear any implication for what we're trying to do in the world. And then the most extreme tactic, number 4, is speculative fictions of what non-human things are doing. Let's write stories a bit like Kafka's Metamorphosis, perhaps, although that does focus on the human being turned into an insect. But let's try and think about what it is like to be something other than human, but inevitably we will be casting some of our phenomenology, human phenomenology, onto those things. That's not a revelation of mine. That owes itself to Thomas Nagel writing in the 70s, when he basically concluded we can't know as humans what it's like to be a bat. However, the project doesn't entirely fall flat there, because, for example, if we look at how non-human elements of the world operate and have sensory configurations that are different to ours, we come to see through science and other modes of investigation that actually what the bee, what the bat, what the whale is seeing as its world, because of its sensory apparatus, is quite different to ours. And we become, I think, through a book like Ed Yong's Immense World book, we become quite humble to realizing there is so much more to the totality of the world than the human sensory bit that we live and pragmatically work within. It is humbling to know that. What we can then do beyond that to understand how those creatures orientate towards that becomes perhaps more of a discussion point. So discussion and closing thoughts now. I'm concluding here that the best direction I think that posthumanism can take us in a broad educational context is towards understanding the processes by which material relations are formed, reproduced, and can be steered towards, better ethical relations. How can we use methods of culture to become more attentive and affinitive towards the stuff of the world, whether that is sentient stuff or mute stuff like bricks? How can we engage with that more than human leveling process to an extent? And that's where I go for a soft version of posthumanism rather than a hard one. We can't leave the human behind, and that's my problem. So this is my final substantive slide. It's a summary slide, really. I'm happy to leave that up if people would find that as a helpful discussion focal point. Maybe just before I do that, if I go to my next slide, just in case anybody does want to access a copy of the 2016 chapter that I've been alluding to, were you to take a photograph of this QR code, that would take you to that a free copy of that chapter. It's a pre-proof version of it on my university repository site. So if you want to get a copy of it, I've been sort of busking to just give you a bit of time to take a copy of the QR code. But I will jump back to that sort of discussion slide. I will stop talking now. I will keep sharing unless and until Keith or Sheena say that it might be better if I stop sharing this screen. But let's see whether this screen can be a provocation of some sorts. So I've stopped now.
Sorry, Luke, there was a question in chat where
okay.
Charlotte, Charlotte, did you want to ask the question, or would you prefer for us to just read it out?
No, that's fine. I can see it now. Thank you. I sort of blinked and that slide went past, so it's all good. Thanks.
Sorry, was that the QR code you were wanting to go back?
No, it was for tactic 2. I was taking down a few notes. Sorry, I should turn my screen on. It's just a bit dark here. I was taking a few notes and that slide just went past quickly. So it's fine. I can see it now. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so if we just open up for any questions, points of discussion, if anybody would like to ask anything of Luke.
I've got a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Think like a brick. I find this really relevant for my research because I've been trying to think with a paintbrush, and that's because I am exploring children and animal relationships in international schools. And so we've been creating art. The students have chosen the art. It's completely kind of free and open. And then I talk to them about what they're creating, and that gives me insights into their relationships with a particular animal. But I suddenly stopped the other day and thought to myself, oh my gosh, the animals are probably present in the tools that we are using to create the artwork about the animals. And so I was looking at the paint and I started reading the labels, and there is such a thing as vegan paint, which was new to me. And I thought, well, how would paint contain animals? And then I was looking at the paper that we use, thinking about the trees and the animals that lived on that tree once. And then I was looking at the paintbrushes and thinking about how paintbrushes in ancient times would have been constructed from animal bones and animal hair, and so on. So it's really entangled our relationship with animals. Of course, humans being an animal as well. So I wonder if you have ever traced back other materials. I'm hearing this is about bricks and stones and things like that. But have you ever explored any other materials, like a paintbrush or a pen or anything like that?
Good question. Have I? No. And I would probably say that my playful engagement with bricks is almost an illustration of not having got to the heart of brickness, and it is perhaps more playful than what you're describing there, which I think is a really important point, to say that no matter how much we try and sort of craft an ethics of care in the kind of way that you're describing, we may still find that we are consuming, and that troublesome conclusion that our simple existence means that we are taking up a portion of the world that would otherwise be able to act differently if we weren't here. But that then ultimately, as a conclusion, might lead one to a rather bleak extinctionism. So no, but I think I'm not going to put it back on the screen, but I said that there was the slide early on where I was putting all the different theoretical routes in, and the best place, the best direction to look in terms of an answer to your question would be material culture studies. So that branch of anthropology that is very much about understanding how life is lived through materials, and increasingly within that field there's an acknowledgement that materials have agency, and that anthropological sensibility can obviously look at more traditional communities who have that more alien to us and therefore more evident to us interaction with, I don't know, creating scraping tools from antler horns or whatever, and we get to there see the connection. But then when we try and look in our own culture, partly through familiarity, partly through complexity, we don't so much see that the embedded carbon or plasticized molecules or whatever have derived from some element of the world that have then been processed by us to almost unrecognizability. Science and technology studies as well. I'm sure there are. I know there are all sorts of studies, whether Latourian or otherwise, that try and trace the origins and effects of particular materials and material formations. So that, I think, is my answer.
Thank you.
Karen, you had your hand up.
Yes, so thank you so much for interesting thoughts, and I'm especially grateful that you tried to nuance posthumanism in all these different directions. I think that was really, really interesting. As far as I remember, when reading your chapter, there was something about you bringing a brick into a classroom that sort of set things in motion. So I was wondering now, what happened between the brick and the students in that room?
Okay, I think the main effect was one of awkwardness and semi-disgust. You're not supposed to bring a dirty brick into a structured theatre. And so the organisers certainly started looking at me rather weirdly when I got this bag out and pulled out this dirty brick. So the transgression moment was both theatrical and also, I think, pointful, but it was also me appropriating the brick. I wasn't giving the brick a chance to be a brick. I was making a point in a transgressive human way. I didn't pass the brick round so that people could contemplate it. And if I had tried to pass it around, people would have largely been disgusted by the fact that it was a dirty brick. So I think we didn't get beyond the cultural encoding of that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. And also, I mean, I start thinking about what would it be like, or how could we induce situations where we could sort of try to nudge beyond that initial awkwardness or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, I suppose, in saying that, well, maybe we could have passed clay around and we could have tried to make some bricks, and that would have been a more engagement with the tactile materiality. But it's still us appropriating it and turning it into something that's familiar to us. You know, if maybe if we'd said, how can we turn a brick back into clay and reinsert it into the environment, maybe that would have worked. But again, it's still humans doing stuff, and therefore it has a human wrapper around it, which we're not getting beyond.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to jump across to Mona's question. Mona, are you there? Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. Firstly, that was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And I don't want to label you, Luke, but you sound like a failed posthumanist, which is also what I am. So I feel some resonance with the presentation for sure. But I was thinking about the tactics that you end up with and kind of the purpose of those tactics. And you mentioned the word humility quite a few times through the presentation. And I wondered whether that's what you felt ultimately we were trying to do. If we're not really trying to think like a brick because we can't think like a brick or be a brick, then where are we trying to get to with attending to the more than human? And is it this place of humility? And if it is, then why? What does the humility afford us as humans?
Okay. Yeah, no, good. That is where I've sort of come to, and I think I'm happy with the idea of failed posthumanist. Certainly, weak posthumanist is as far as I can probably take it, because as you've heard in my presentation and my answers to the various questions, I can't escape the tumble back into human purposiveness. And so what is the purpose of humility? I suppose it's coming from a sort of broadly ecological and fairly conventional standpoint, which is encapsulated in this idea of more than human. So more than human doesn't erase the human bit. It says, let's just not be imperialistic or colonialistic humans wandering around the world appropriating everything. Let's be a bit more aware of our footsteps. Let's be a bit more aware of our actions, because we need to be more aware of our actions in order to be better collaborationists in the world. So it's sort of an ethics of care type point, I guess. And that ethics is best served by awareness of a humble type. So I don't think there's anything particularly profound, and it might be actually quite weak and liberal, I don't know. But it's the best sort of standpoint that I can come to, which is if we're going to bother to think about stuff in the world, we have to be doing it for a reason, it seems to me. Otherwise, we're doing it for a sort of weird, I don't want to be human, I want to be a rock kind of purpose, which doesn't really help anything, because no matter how hard I want to be a rock, I'm never going to be a rock. So yeah, the instinct is to turn it into something purposive, which is humanistic, which does take us back in that direction. So yeah, you're right to pick up on what you pick up on.
Did you want to follow up or anything, Mona?
No, just to say, I didn't mean it as a slight when I called you a failed posthumanist, so please don't take it badly.
I didn't
I
take
mean
it
it
as a
I mean
slight.
it in a
I know where
polite
you're
way.
coming from. And the whole writing of the paper, the whole journey was I don't know how I can do this, because now that you've put the word educational into it, I can't get beyond this idea that in most senses, education is about humans, and it is about human progress, and therefore it is about human existence, and our existence extracts and appropriates from the world. So all I can be left with then is an ethics of care by which we appreciate what we're taking from the world. And well, so I'm not offended.
Yeah, and I think just sorry, I don't want to hog, but just that there is a kind of richness in the ethics of care that perhaps comes through the tactics that you're suggesting, so it doesn't fall back into kind of, you know, an ethics of care that you could reach through other routes, that maybe there is a richness to the ethics of care that comes about through the attentiveness. But yeah, thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that might be an appropriate place to wrap our conversation. Please put your hands together and thank Luke for getting up early on a Thursday evening for us, a Thursday morning for him. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I think you've struck exactly the right kind of tone for the way we want to go forward with this seminar series, which is about learning together. You know, and not being the experts in the room, but being adventurous. And the word that you said a lot that resonated for me was being a little bit playful as well. And I'm open to playfulness in our research work. This is just one of 6 seminar series. We've got more coming up, and I will put in the chat the link to find out more and to register. So please don't hesitate to register, and we're going to be doing one of these a month. Next week, though, we are also going to have a debriefing session. Now, this is specifically aimed at people who are perhaps doing their PhD, high degree research, or early career researchers, and want to have more of a discussion to unpack the ideas that Luke has raised in this conversation. So we will send you all some information about that. Sheena and I were just talking about, because we've got such a fantastic international interest in this, we might try to put it on a time that works for more people than in the middle of the day, Australian time. So we'll send out an email to everyone who's registered, inviting you along to that one, and also telling you about the next session as well. But please, one more time, thank Luke, and enjoy the rest of your day/evening.
Just to shout in, I'll send you a copy of my slides, and so
Thanks, Luke.
if you're mindful to circulate them, I'm absolutely happy for them to be circulated.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Luke.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.